All right, so you know the drill. Next one is Italy. This is a big one. So we're really not going to cover like specific dishes. We're going to talk about fundamental flavoring ingredients, things that are important traditionally, and the regions of Italy. Okay. Your study guide this week's pretty big, but you're going to find a lot of really good specific information. And when you're done reading it, you're going to be really well informed about Italian food. So Italy has a long and eventful culinary tradition and is one food culture that truly celebrates food on a daily basis. It's a big part of life. Okay. While there is an abundance of different regions in Italy with varying specialties, we can generalize the food regions of Italy into three parts. Okay. The north, the south, and then Emilia Romagna. Okay. So if we just look at the geography of Italy, in the north there is borders with other European nations: France, Switzerland, Austria, Slovenia. Okay, um, in the south it is a lot of water. Right, you're basically just in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea in Italy. And what I think is really interesting about Italy is it is like the middle point between the Middle East, the North African part of the Middle East. So I guess it's the middle point between the Asian part of the Middle East, the African part of the Middle East, and Europe. Okay, so really, it's in a very interesting spot geographically, as far as being close to all these different influences, and you'll see that in the food. It's pretty interesting. Okay, so let's start with the north. So in the northern region of Italy, it's an area that's connected to Europe, obviously. It shares a border with France, Switzerland, Austria, and Slovenia, just like I said. And since it's up in the north, there's some mountainous regions, some foresty regions. It gets a lot colder than the south during the winter months, and that's present in the food. You're going to find a lot more. This is again another generalization, but you're going to find a lot more hearty, warming, filling foods in the north, in my opinion. But the one big thing historically in the north is that it was known for having an abundance of livestock and cattle. And why does that matter? Because if you have a lot of cattle and you have a lot of livestock, you're going to have a lot of dairy. So in the north, we're going to see lots of cheese and cream and butter and stuff like that. When you're thinking of like creamy Italian food, that's northern Italian food. Okay. It is characteristics by using ingredients like butter, rice, corn being polenta, which we'll talk about, cheeses, and cream. Okay. You'll find ingredients like tomatoes, olive oil, and pasta are generally less common, but that doesn't mean that they're non existent. So there are tomatoes, there is a lot of olive oil, there is pasta. It's just less prevalent than it would be in the south. Okay, there are many different regions in northern Italy, and each of them have their own specialities and their own dishes that uh, they're famous for based on the history of the people that live there, the ingredients that grow there, the climate, all that stuff. In your study guide, I go over one, two, three, four, five, six different northern Italian regions and give you some good, really specific information. So please make sure you read that. Okay, let's go to the south next. All right. Um, Southern Italy has a contrasting history, right? So historically, it is where the poorest people in Italian history lived. Um, but on the other hand, the nobility in the area was extraordinarily wealthy and enjoyed a really lavish diet. So we're going to find peasant food, okay? And we're also going to find some really intricate, unique food in the southern parts of Italy. So while in the north, I said it shares borders with European countries in the north, the south of Italy is all water. It's a peninsula again. Just like Korea was, Italy is a peninsula. Uh, so it's surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea. The food culture is directly impacted by that, specifically the Mediterranean climate. So things like tomatoes, olives, eggplant, all those Mediterranean vegetables and fruits, citrus fruits, grapes, um, they're really abundant there. And it's really common because of a really long and hot growing season. So their growing season, their time where things grow is long and pretty warm. Okay. And again, just like in the north, there's regional specialties and tradition that are extremely important and vary greatly based on where you are. We can make some generalizations that there's going to be more olive oil, there's going to be more pasta, there's going to be more tomato-based things in the south. There's going to be more use of spices because they're closer to North Africa. But again, those are generalities. If you look in the study guide and see what I have for each region, it's crazy how different the history and the food is really based on what region you're in Italy. That's a very interesting thing about Italian food culture. And then the last one that we'll focus on is Emilia Romagna. And this is a place that really focuses on heavily on generous seasoning. Okay, so their food is very flavorful with things like olives, meats, fish, salumi, which we'll talk about, and cheeses. The region contains super famous foods and ingredients such as Parmigiano Reggiano, balsamic vinegar, prosciutto, well-known pastas like tagliatelle, cappelletti, tortellini, lasagna. All those things come from Emilia Romagna. And it's such a big deal because it's the epicenter of Italian cuisines, or well, I guess cuisines as well, but Italian cuisine in general. It has deltas that are rich with fish. It has vast farmlands, perfect for maintaining animals in the pasture. There's mountains that divide the borders from Tuscany and La Marche above the fertile plains. Okay, so it's a place that's bountiful. Like when we're talking about classic, well-known Italian food, it's probably coming from Emilia Romagna, which is again in like the north central part of Italy. I should have included a map, but I didn't. Cities of Bologna, Parma, and Modena have become unique culinary destinations. Um, I'm on the Via Emilia, which is that ancient Roman road connecting the region's uh, important cities, with threads of impact from Roman Empire, Byzantine customs, Lombard traditions, and all those things from their history are going to form the really distinctive food heritage that you're going to find in Emilia Romagna. Okay. Again, in your study guide, we go over Bologna, Modena, Parma, and Ravenna. Okay. And those are really important cities when it comes to Italian food. So please make sure that you're reading about all those different regions. Now, again, like I said, we're going to focus on notable ingredients more so than dishes, because if we understand the ingredients and the flavoring and the like how flavor is built and what's important, um, then you'll understand Italian food. Okay, so pasta is often made from semolina, which is coarsely ground durum wheat. We learned in Morocco they use semolina to make couscous, which is also kind of another type of pasta. But it comes in many shapes and sizes in Italy. The basic ingredients to make a pasta dough are flour, moisture, and like flavoring or seasonings. Um, but those are the building blocks. If you can mess with the flour or the moisture or the seasonings, you can make a bunch of different types of pasta. So while semolina is the most common type of flour, a whole bunch of different types of flour can be made to make a specific pasta. And you'll find that based on regions, they might use different types of flour, different types of shapes, different type of moisture, all that stuff. So eggs are very commonly added for the moisture, but some pasta doughs are made simply with water and flour. Some might have vegetable purees or some type of other form of moisture in there too that's going to change it, like spinach pasta is green. Um, Lots of other things, right? Over time, pasta's gotten more and more varied and more complex, but the basic building block, remember, is flour, moisture, seasoning. Okay, pasta can be fresh or dried. It can be filled or unfilled. There's a lot of variations. But the main thing that Italians are looking for in most of their pasta is that al dente texture, which means literally translated to the tooth. Al dente is referring to uh, the texture of a grain or a pasta that is slightly crisp in the center or offers a little bit of resistance when you bite into it. That's the most desirable texture for pasta. Okay, if you've taken culinary foundations with me, you've talked at length about all that type of stuff. Okay, another form of starch that's really important is rice. And most of the time when we're talking about rice in Italy, we're referring to risotto. And risotto is a classic dish. It's a rich, creamy dish with a nearly like porridge like consistency. Um, this is one thing that's really important. Real risotto should like run on the plate. It should be more soupy than it is like globular and sticky. A lot of bad risotto gets served in America where it's either overcooked or there's like a bunch of butter and cream and stuff like that, and it makes it really gluey and sticky, right? Risotto is a creamy dish that's thickened by the rice starch, right? And it's important to use the specific type of rice. You want to use an Italian rounded, short or medium grain rice. And the ones that are really well known are Carnaroli, Arborio, and Vialone Nano. Okay, those are the three big ones. They're in your study guide, of course. Um, but they have the right amount of starch. And when you do the process of cooking the hot liquid and stirring the rice constantly in the hot liquid, you make a really creamy, um, silky texture. Okay. And there is an Italian word for that, mantecato. Okay. It's in your study guide. It's an Italian term used to describe the proper texture of risotto, which is creamy and loose. It shouldn't be stiff and gluey. Remember that. A properly mantecato risotto should almost run like a soup and be very creamy from the rice starch thickened liquid. All right. Straight up. Real important. Another one is polenta. Okay, so polenta is a cornmeal mixture. Basically, you'll see here different types of cornmeal, whether it's machine ground or stone ground. Um, it's it's dehydrated corn that's been pulverized, and then it's cooked in simmering liquid until the grain softens and the liquid's absorbed. Okay, but based on how you cook it, you can do a bunch of different things with it. Risotto can be hot or cold. It can be firm or soft. It can be like this, where it's like a porridge, or it can be like that, where it's like a cake. It can be fried or grilled. Um, Lots of different things that you can do with polenta. But remember, it's based on cornmeal. So corn starch being another type of starch. And then lastly, we'll talk about breads. Okay, so the bread products are a large part of Italian cuisine, and there are almost limitless variations. Okay, based on where you were at, tons of regional specialties. There's a large variety of ingredients and techniques that are used. These are just some examples. These are ones that I care about and think are interesting. And we're going to start with pizza bianca. Okay, we'll talk about a bunch of different types of pizzas in a minute, but pizza bianca really is a type of bread that's typical all over Italy, but it's called pizza bianca in Rome specifically. It's a long, airy type of leavened bread that is cooked in a brick oven, and it can be served plain or it can be served with some simple toppings, or some people make sandwiches out of it, but it's a really flavorful, interesting type of bread, similar to focaccia, which we'll talk about, but it's a little less airy and soft. It's more crunchy and crispy, and it's really long. Maybe I'll try to find a video, but when they when they put it into the oven with the paddle, it's like crazy long, 10 feet, 15 feet long, wild. All right, it comes out. It's usually just brushed with olive oil, maybe a little salt, and served. Sometimes it's brushed with a little San Marzano tomato. Very simple, very classic. Pizza bianca. Okay, one that we've all heard about most likely is ciabatta. It's a semi-flat, so it is rounded. I didn't want to say flat, but it's not super tall. It's a semi-flat leavened bread that's ideal for sandwich making. So you could see it just sliced and being served, but you could also see it as a sandwich bread. Um, though the dough is somewhat like pizza bianca, but it's a little bit harder and has much less oil than pizza bianca would. So a lot of Italian breads have a lot of olive oil in there for cooking purposes, also for texture purposes. But ciabatta has much less oil than a pizza bianca would, but their doughs are somewhat similar. Okay, a sweet one. Let's talk about the cornetto. Okay, so if you look at it, you're like, that's a croissant. Well, Italy shares a border with France, right? So it's similar to a French croissant, but they are sweeter and often filled with something like this sweet cream right here, or they could be filled with jam. It's a very typical Italian breakfast food, the cornetto. Okay, a sweeter croissant, basically. Okay, focaccia. This is a big one. Okay, so I like to think focaccia is kind of similar to pizza bianca, but It's got a whole lot of oil. It's really soft. Lots. It's very delicious. So there are many regional variations on focaccia, but they're all semi-flat, super airy doughs that have distinct divots and holes in them. And those divots are from prodding them with your fingers as you're stretching the dough out because it's very stretchy, it's very airy. You need to kind of work it over time to get it to be nice and big. So the fingers are there. They collect some oil because you're putting a ton of olive oil in the dough and on the pan and on top of the dough. Um, and that olive oil is going to have a really like crisp outside. I wouldn't say that it's crusty, but it's crisp outside, really soft inside, very tender, very fatty. Um, Usually has some type of seasoning, but straight up focaccia is really common. And you can find it anywhere in America too. Focaccia is everywhere, so it's a really easy dough to make, very delicious. You can do a bunch to it, or you can keep it really simple. Okay, Piadina Romagnola. Okay, so this is from the Emilia Romana region, and it's typically served as a sandwich bread, um, but there's a lot you can do with it. So it's a griddled Italian flatbread that's typically served as sandwich bread. And it used to be just merely a staple of poor people, right? This was a bread eaten by the peasants or the poor people, but over time, it became more popular. Again, it's an Italian flatbread. Uh, it's typically served as a sandwich. A lot of times, it has things like prosciutto or creamy soft cheeses or tomatoes with some arugula or herbs or something and wrapped up. Pretty common street food. Okay, but again, not everything's leavened, right? There's flatbreads that are cooked similar to what maybe some Middle Eastern style bread. How could that happen? Well, they're right next to North Africa, so lots of things. Okay, farinata de ceci is a Liguorian dish. It's an oven baked flatbread made with chickpea flour. So it's chickpea flour, water, olive oil, salt, and its origins can be traced to Roman times. Um, So there's a little bit of history of it in your study guide, but I wanted to show that it's not always wheat flour, right? It's not always durum wheat or soft wheat flour. It can be things like chickpeas. So um, again, this is that Mediterranean influence. Remember, Italy's in the heart of the Mediterranean Sea, so we're going to see a lot of things that you might see in Morocco or the Middle East. Chickpeas being something that you can find in all those countries, and they can all make bread with it. So that's one. Now let's go to pizza. Okay, so there are many, like a lot of different regional variations on pizza itself, but I'll tell you what we know as pizza in America is vastly different to the way pizza culture is treated in Italy, where there are not only regional specialties in Italy, but there's like time-honored rules and traditions that people adhere to, and we'll find that a lot when we talk about different, like really important ingredients. There are legitimate rules that the government puts. Like you cannot call Parmigiano Reggiano unless it's grown here and it's aged this month or this amount of time. A lot of foods in Italy are treated with that level of respect to the point of like misinterpreting or misdefining a word, saying the wrong thing about it could be taken really poorly. So pizza is very very important in that role as well. Pizza Neapolitana or Napoleon style or Napoli style. Sorry, Napoli style pizza is one of the most famous types of pizza. And again, it's protected by a tradition speciality guarantee, a TSG certification, meaning that it has to be cooked in a specific way, or you can't call it Napoli style pizza. The dough is comprised of wheat flour, yeast, salt, and it has to rise for up to 24 hours. Then it's shaped into a flat round disc and topped with ingredients and baked for 90 seconds, 2 minutes maybe, in a really hot wood burning oven. So that super hot heat and that soft dough creates a soft, elastic heart with a tail of fluffy crust. Um, and there's words for all these different parts. So the Napoli style pizza is kind of wet in the middle. It's got a good crust. It's not like a pizza that's going to stand up. Um, but this is like the classic, like when we think Italian pizza. Like this is probably the first thing that comes to mind. But there's a ton of different other types of pizza, right? Tonda Romana. So this is it might look a little bit similar to the Napoli style pizza, but it's flat and round and has an extremely thin crust. And the crust is basically like a cracker. So it's a really crispy, really thin crust that's cracker like the Tonda Romana. And then there's more, right? So the original Hot Pocket, in my opinion, or the calzone or whatever you want to call it. But it's a deep fried pizza, pizza frita. It's a classic Neapolitan street food. It's made from fried pizza dough. It comes in a lot of different shapes and forms. Um, Sometimes there's like calzone shaped half moon ones. There's ones in different shapes than that too. Uh, but like a lot of really good foods we found in history, and specifically in Italy, it was born out of a crisis. So after World War II, the price of mozzarella and wood for the ovens increased dramatically, right? So pizza became more expensive to make. So, in order to continue to serve their staple dish, cooks in Napoli decided to fry the dough instead of baking it, filling it with whatever ingredients they had on hand. So, there's a lot of different variation on what's inside of it, but it's pizza dough and it's deep fried. Okay. Sicilian pizza, or some people call it grandma pizza, also known as sfincione. Sfincione, Sfincione, is a Sicilian style pizza with a thick crust and a fluffy sponge like consistency. It's baked in rectangular shaped pans and topped with tomato sauce, often anchovies, onions, oregano, and then usually like a hard sheep's milk cheese. I think I don't have it on there, do I? I think that cheese that's most common is Caciocavallo. Um, that's just off the top of my head. I could be wrong, but for the final touch, once it's cooked, it's covered in or before it's cooked, it's covered in breadcrumbs to absorb some of the oil from the ingredients, and it has a really nice, flavorful crust because of that. So sfincione is often served in bakeries, or Sicilian pizza is the other word, is often served in bakeries rather than pizzerias, and it's a really popular snack or street food. Okay, now there are a lot more types of pizza than that. But those are just some fun ones that I wanted to show. But believe me, there's a lot more. And on top of that, uh, Italy's modern chef culture is pretty big too. So there are Italian people pushing the boundaries and making some wacky stuff out there on top of that too. But these are the traditional things. Okay, salumi. Now, I was going back and forth whether I should put pictures and explain all the different types of salumi that I put in your study guide. Um, but I ultimately didn't. So in your study guide, I go over 10 different types of salumi. Um, and you can read about them and look them up yourself. But I thought that'd be a lot, a lot to put on here because we have a lot more stuff to talk about. But salumi is an Italian term that refers to all the different types of cured meat products, mainly made from pork, but there's some that are beef. So like salumi could also include something like bresaola, which is a cured beef product, or something that's cooked, like mortadella or prosciutto cotto. Okay, so salumi can be ground meats that's cased and fermented, like all these types of salamis. These are ground meats. They're put in case. They're hung up to dry. Um, or they can be whole large muscles, like prosciutto di Parma, or any type of prosciutto can be a whole muscle, right? And again, salumi, like there's these big categories of food in Italy: pasta, the breads, the salumi, the cheeses. Um, and there are just massive variations to the point where it gets staggering to think about. Like, uh, like I know even with things like wine, like everywhere in the world makes wine. Italy has over like 3,000 different types of grape varieties just for wine. They have over 600 different types of cheeses. And all those things are really made specifically, and they have that traditional or the TSG certification, meaning that it has to be made this way at this time in this place. So again, it's a culture of specialization and getting really good at what you're what you're doing because you've been doing it for so long. I'm not going to say it right now, but when you hear that it's a culture of specialization and they got really good at doing a few things really, really well, it should make you think of the first country that we talked about this year. That's a really interesting comparison we can make. Okay, so I'm not going to go too crazy about salumi. Let's move on. So cheeses, we could talk all day about Italian cheeses. I chose out some important ones. There's obviously way more than I'm about to talk about, but let's just start with the soft cheeses. Okay, three that I really like: burrata, which is a close relative to mozzarella. It's a richly creamy cheese from the south of Italy. It has a distinctive, soft, liquidy center, which is like basically ready to burst at any moment. Um, Traditionally, it was encased in the leaves of a lily plant and brined. However, most of the times you'll just see it, it's formed into a ball and then put into a plastic container with brine. So it's kind of like an outer layer of mozzarella with an inward layer of chopped up cheese and cream mixture, right? Interesting texture. Mozzarella is probably the most well known Italian cheese. It's traditionally, it was made with buffalo's milk, but many producers today make it with cow's milk because it's less expensive. There's a lot of different types of mozzarella, different shapes, sizes, firmness, lots of that type of stuff. But the process is basically warming up cheese curds until they become soft, and then you're like stretching them and then forming the balls or whatever type of shape you're making. Um, but yeah, mozzarella huge, and then mascarpone, which is like, I think it's basically just butter. Like it's like unfermented butter, but it's a fresh cheese. It's made really quickly. It's smooth. It's rich. It's spreadable. It's made from cow's milk cream that's been thickened by the addition of acid. So you can add citric acid. You could add lemon juice. You could add tartaric acid. And then you just let it sit. The whey drains out, and then all you're left with is basically milk fat. And it's so good. It's really delicious. Okay, so there's some other types of cheeses, some semi-soft, some semi-hard, and some blue cheese. I wanted to at least go through one of each of them. So this is Fontina. That's a semi-soft cheese that's coming from the north of Italy, the North Aosta Valley. It has many bubbly holes in it. It's a creamy in flavor with aged nutty notes. To be again, this is something that needs classification. So to be classified as proper Fontina, it needs to be made from the milk from a single milking to which rennet is later added. It's then heated, strained, salted, poured into molds, and aged from anywhere from 3 to 10 months. So you can find both young Fontina that's 3 months old, and you can find mature Fontina that's 10 months old. The older cheese gets, the more depth of flavor happens, the more rich and funky it kind of gets. Okay, so that's a semi-soft cheese. So let's talk about a semi-hard cheese, provolone. That its notes, its flavor changes or ranges from creamy, nutty, waxy to smoky, and tangy. Right. So it's an aged, stretched curd cheese made from cow's milk. So like mozzarella was a stretched curd cheese. This is like an aged version of that. Pale white provolone dulce is the youngest variety and is aged for like 4 months. 4 months. Um, in comparison to provolone picante, which can be aged for 3 years, right? So semi-hard cheese, but again, a wide array of flavors based on the aging process. Okay, and then I would say probably the most famous blue cheeses, probably one of the most famous on the planet, definitely the most famous Italian blue cheese is Gorgonzola. Um, it's firmer when it's refrigerated, but when you leave it out at room temperature, it starts to become oozy, and kind of melty a little bit. Gorgonzola is made from whole milk. Okay, so special bacteria and spores are added and agitated during the aging process to create its uniquely pungent flavor and striking blue marbling. Okay, there are two different types of aging processes: Gorgonzola Dolce, which is milder and creamier in flavor, and again, Gorgonzola Picante, which has been aged longer and has a way more pungent flavor. Um, so again, it's like sweet Gorgonzola or spicy Gorgonzola based on how long you want it. It's dank, it's stinky, really delicious. Okay, and then the last category are the hard cheeses, which are the ones that we probably know about the most, just from hearing. You like people hear Parmesan all the time, right? But there's a lot of different types of hard cheeses in Italy. So the first one, Grana Padano. I really like this cheese because it's pretty mild. Um, it may look like Parmesan, however, it's only needed to age 9 months. So it results in a mild, softer cheese than Parmesan. It can be made all year round, but the quality can depend, varying on when the season it's produced. Milk changes throughout the year based on the cow's diet or the amount the cow moves, the heat, all those types of things can really affect the flavor and the color of milk. So, depending on when you cultivated that milk and started the cheese making process, the flavor can be very different. Due to its simpler production rules than other types of cheeses, it's cheaper in price and purchased more often than Parmigiano Reggiano, which is really specific. And Parmesan Reggiano is Italian's most famous cheese, right? It's like the king of cheeses. Um, it's been around in the north of Italy since the Middle Ages, right? So that's a crazy long time. Parmesan can legally only be made between April and November. Remember, the milk is very different during different times of the year. So Parmesan can only legally be made between April and November with milk from grass-fed cows. Very important restrictions and regulations. It is made from the curds from a mixture of whole and skimmed milk and is salt brined for about 25 days. So it sits in a salt liquid for 25 days and then it's transferred to an aging place like a cave or a big cheese aging facility, depending on where you are. And it has to age for at least 12 months. So it's not Parmesan unless it's aged for 12 months and it's made with that milk from April and November from grass fed cows. But again, like some other cheeses in Italy, 12 months is the minimum. Some Parmesans can be aged for up to 6 years, right? So again, the price range and the flavor profile varies greatly based on the aging process. And then the last one is pecorino. It's a hard cheese made from sheep's milk this time with a wide range of flavors. It can be nutty to salty or savory to tangy or a combination of all those things. There's six main regional variants, with the most famous being Pecorino Romano and Pecorino Sardo. So Sardo is from Sardinia, Romano is from Rome, right? Pecorino is made all over Italy, each with its own unique flavor and slightly different process, and is typically aged for about 8 months. It can be sold as a softer texture or a harder texture, um, based on how long it's aged, right? Same with flavor. Okay. Now, again, I said we're not going to talk about actual dishes. Let's just talk about like categories and processes of flavoring ingredients or staples of the diet. So we're going to go just through, I think, six terms. The first one being brodo, literally meaning broth. Brodo refers to flavorful meat or vegetable based liquids that can either be used as a base for sauces or stews or just straight up served on their own. Um, when you see things are served on brodo, it means they're served in broth. So like this is tortellini on brodo, meaning tortellini served in broth. Very classic, probably the most famous way of having something with a brodo is with tortellini. Okay, and then ragu. All right, we've all probably know what meat-based pasta sauce is. So ragu is a meat-based Italian sauce. Again, there's many variations to ragu, but the most famous one is bolognese, right? So the bolognese sauce. These sauces are usually cooked for a very long time, very delicately, allowing each stage of the cooking process enough time to fully develop flavor. So I know for a fact when you make bolognese, when you cook the meat, it's very particular. And then you add the vegetables, it's very particular. You add milk, it has to be done at the right time. All these things, all those steps in that process need to be taken with care and um, and really delicate detail, a lot of finesse. Because the difference between doing those processes right or wrong can result in very different end products. So Italian food is one that really cares about the process, the time it takes to do everything right, and let things cook and let them take their time. It's a slow food culture, right? Slow food. Sugo, all right. Sugo traditionally refers to just sauce. It's really most commonly referred to as just simple tomato sauce. And if we're being really specific, proper like Italian tomato sauce is made with San Marzano tomatoes, right? Those are the best sauce tomatoes, and you can buy cans of San Marzano in any grocery store. They're very popular because they're the best. Like most pizza sauce, Italian pizza sauce is just blended up San Marzano tomatoes, no salt, no garlic, whatever. It's just the tomatoes because they're that good for sauce. Okay. In modern times, the term sugo has become a little bit more loosely translated, referring to many different types of sauces that are served with pastas. But the main one's tomato, and if it's going to be cooked, a sugo again is provided the proper time to slowly cook and fully develop its flavor. Slow food. Take your time, do everything right. All right, caponata. All right, traditionally, this is a Sicilian dish that consists of diced fried eggplant with olive oil, tomatoes, olives, capers, sometimes pine nuts. Like you see all those little pine nuts in there. And then something called agrodolce. Agrodolce is the same thing as in France called gastrique. It's basically a sweet and sour sauce, usually made with just vinegar and sugar. Okay. So this is a sweet and sour condiment or stewed vegetable. In modern times, caponata has become to be referred to as a bunch of different variations on stewed vegetables that are mixed with some sweet and sour flavor. But the important thing is that this is a sweet and sour stewed vegetable dish slash maybe condiment, but really it's like served with bread. It's its own thing. Traditionally with eggplant, but as time progresses, people are making more and more different types of caponata. But this is the OG. This is that eggplant. That's the normal one. That's the traditional one. Okay, and then sofrito. So sofrito literally means under fried or fried slowly. If you are of Latin American descent, you might have heard sofrito before. If you have ever been to Spain, they talk about sofrito. So it's something that does come from that part of Europe and has been dispersed throughout the world. But it's again, it means under fried or fried slowly. It's a process more than anything. It's the process of gently cooking vegetables in olive oil over a long period of time to soften them and release their flavor. Again, this people like sometimes like boast like, oh, my sofrito's been cooking for 4 hours. Like it's really taking its time. So it obviously doesn't need to be that extreme, but it is again another slow food thing. Take the time, do it right, get all the flavor out of there. So any combination of vegetables can be used for sofrito, though they are normally very aromatic vegetables like onions, peppers, celery, carrots, garlic, stuff like that. Sofrito is a really important building block to develop flavor in Italian cooking. So if I want to make really good sauce, I might start with a sofrito. If I want to make a really good stew, anytime you want to have that depth of flavor with those aromatic vegetables, you're probably going to look at sofrito. Okay. And then the last one, I want to just throw this in here, was pesto, literally meaning paste. This is a mixture of basil, pine nuts, olive oil, garlic, often cheese is added. Um, Originally from Liguria, pesto is traditionally served with trophy or trinette pasta. So again, um, they're very specific about what goes with what. Each pasta has a sauce that it goes with. So this pesto sauce goes with a specific type of pasta. Um, Over time, there have been different variations on pesto where people are getting kind of wacky with it. But the basil and pine nut version from Liguria is the standard. Okay, that's the important one. Now, I know this was probably a really long, I haven't checked the time, but I'm assuming that was a really long lecture. Uh, that's Italian food for you, right? It's a deep, long history. They've been cooking food at a high level for a really long time, and they boast about it. They really care about it. So read your study guide. I hope you learned some new stuff, and then we'll talk about it on Monday. Thank you.